Hey you guys, in this video we're going to be talking about retouching. This is something that I know you were asking about, so we're going to take a look at it. Now before we get started, and this is just going to be a basics of retouching. Before I do that, I want to point out the whole idea behind retouching. And just looking at this might help you guys out tremendously if you understand it. What we're going to be doing, what I'm going to be demonstrating here is I'm going to be showing you how to clean up some of the little blemishes that are on the skin here. And for anonymity, I've just zoomed in really tightly on the forehead for the cropped in, I should say, really tightly to the forehead, so we don't know who this young lady is. But what I want to point out is take a look at this spot right here. Notice that the reason that we can tell that it's a blemish is because of the shadow that's around it. Notice the highlight right here. The highlight right there is the same as the highlights that are surrounding the skin there. What really makes it stand out is the shadow that's around it here. So if we understand that as a concept, all we really would have to do is work on that shadow to get it to match the surrounding lighter tones. Okay, but most people don't even think about that. Most people just want to grab the tools and just get in there and start using the tools to clean up. And that's what we're going to do right now. Now, when retouching, it's always best to retouch on a separate layer, never on your background layer or on the layer that the image happens to be on. So what we need to do is create a new layer. So I pointed out a number of different ways that you can do so. I'm just going to go down to the bottom here and click on the create new layer icon, and that's going to add a new layer. Now keep in mind that when you create a new layer, the new layer is blank. It has nothing in it or nothing on it. So I could toggle that on and off and nothing's going to happen visibly on the image here. Next thing is you want to zoom in. So typically, you're going to be, depending on the size of your image, which is going to be based on the megapixel of your camera and also your the view within the image within the frame, how much you have to zoom in. But typically, 200% is going to be a good magnification for starters. You can go a little higher, but you also have to know what to look at as you get in closer, because as you do, you're going to get more so to the pixel level. All right, so you really have to pay attention to what's happening with the image. All right, so now that we understand that we need to be working on a separate layer, let's go over to our toolbar and let's talk about the tools that we can use to do this retouching. So the first one that we're going to take a look at are the healing options. So with the first tool that we have here is the spot healing brush. Now I'm only going to cover three of these: the spot healing brush, the healing brush, and the patch tool. Notice that you toggle between all of them with the letter J as a shortcut. All right, now also keep in mind that by default, Photoshop's preferences are to use Shift plus this letter. Even though it doesn't show Shift, it's Shift J, Shift J, Shift J, but you can disable that in the preferences. All right, so going on to the spot healing brush. I'm going to click on this tool and we're going to take a look at the options up at the top. So the options that we have here are to save presets. We can create our own presets to use over and over again. Next to that, we have the size of the brush. All right, so we're going to see some additional options that we didn't see with the paintbrush, which would be spacing, angle, and roundness. If you have a tablet, you can also use pen pressure. Now, also keep in mind that as a shortcut, when we're using this tool, we can simply right-click on the image and we'll get those tools in front of us, as we did with the paintbrush when working with the layer masks. We also have blend modes that we can work with. The blend modes are going to be different than what we saw in, or than what we see with the layers, which is also going to be different than what we see with the brushes as well. Now we have three types that we can choose from. The first one is proximity match. And what this does is it uses the pixels around the edge of the selection to find an area to use as a patch. Next up, we have create texture, which is going to use the pixels within the selection to create a texture. The next one is content aware. And what this is going to do is it's going to compare the nearby image content to seamlessly fill the selection realistically. It's going to maintain shadow and highlights. So this is one that we probably want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that option. As we move along, the next option that we have is sample all layers. Now, sample all layers, notice that it's disabled right now. So with it being disabled, meaning that there's no check in the box there, if I were to take this tool and go over to a blemish and start painting over it, nothing happens. The reason nothing happens is because if we look at the layer, there's nothing on that layer for it to work with. So if I turn it off when I'm doing this, it has no pixel information to work with. Now, if I were on the background layer, if that were the active layer and I did that, it would work just fine. All right, but that's also working on the layer. So if we don't get good results, then what's going to happen is we could be messing the image up. So this is the reason why we work on a separate layer. That's where this option of sample all layers becomes really important. By putting a check mark in sample all layers, even though I have layer 1 selected and there's nothing on layer 1, when I click and drag over the area to paint this selection, what it's going to do is it's going to observe the pixels below it. All right, and if there were any above it. So once I let it go, it fixes it. Now take a look over at the layer panel. In the layers panel, we'll see that we have this little mark here. I can turn the eyeball on and off, and we'll see the little blemish come and go. Okay, so we work on a separate layer when we do all of our retouching. The next tool that we have is the healing brush tool. Now the healing brush, let's take a look at the options. Once again, we can save a preset. We have our brush size again that we can adjust. Once again, right click. We also have the options for it. So we can open up the clone source dialog box. One thing that's really unique about the clone source is that you can change the angle of the brush, which is really good when, or really great when you're going around curves, such as the eyebrows here. Okay, so going back up to the top, we have our source, and we're going to use a sampled source versus a pattern. If you choose pattern, what it's actually going to do is it's going to clone a pattern onto your image. Okay, so we don't want a pattern. We're going to leave that set to sample. Aligned. So with aligned, let me make the brush a little bigger so we could see this. When using this tool, one thing that's different about the previous tool that we took a look at is you have to hold down your Option key or Alt key on a PC in order to choose the area that you want to sample from. So for example, if I want to, well, I'm just doing this as an example because I'm using a larger brush so you can see this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my cursor over here. I'm going to hold down the Option key and click. Now I'm going to move my brush over here. And once I start painting, you'll see the little crosshair from where I originally selected. Okay, it's currently aligned with with my source. All right, now if I move my cursor over here and start painting again, we'll see the crosshair in at the exact same angle and the exact same distance from my original click. All right, even though nothing's happening because of what we're sampling, which I'll get to in a moment. Now I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to uncheck aligned. Once again, I'm going to option click right around here. I'm going to move my cursor over and start painting, and once again we'll see the crosshair in the original location where I clicked. Now I'm going to move my brush up here. Now watch as I start painting. We would expect the cursor to be directly to the left, or the crosshair, but watch as I start painting. Notice how the crosshair stays in the original location. It's still in the same spot that I initially option clicked. Move down here, stays in the same spot. Move right here, it's in the same spot. It is no longer aligned. Okay, that is what that aligned option means. All right, now the reason that we're not seeing anything, any of the adjustments that I'm making, is because of what is set as the sample. Right now it's set to current layer, and you may have noticed that a little spot came up there simply because the current layer only contained a little bit of information, and as I was cloning, I just happened to sample in that area, so I'm putting little marks here and there. Other than that, there's nothing on this layer. Okay, so if I set it to current and below, what it's going to do is it's going to use the layer that I'm currently on, any information that's on that layer, which would include those little spots that I just showed you, and anything below it in the stacking order. If I set it to all layers, not only is it going to look below, but it's also going to see the layers that are above it as well. All right, so I'm going to choose current and below for this particular one. And there's a couple of options that I want to point out here as well. The first one is to ignore adjustment layers. This could be really important if you guys have adjustment layers that you're using to color correct the image. If you're doing some retouching below that, and it's using the adjustment layers, it could be making your image worse. It could be becoming darker, it could be becoming lighter. The colors could change, so you may want to choose to ignore the adjustment layers. And if you have adjustment layers on your image when you're doing this, you'll see what I mean. And then this one, which is also in the previous tool that I didn't point out, is using pen pressure. So if you have a tablet, you can use pen pressure with this. Now I also want to remind you guys, as I did in a previous video, that you can scrub left or right by holding down the Option and Control key to make your brush larger or smaller on the fly, and or you can scrub up and down, up to make your brush softer, to change the hardness to make the hardness lower, or down to increase the hardness, which is going to make the edge harder. All right, so you can choose what you want as far as your brush goes simply by holding those two keys down. Otherwise, you can always just right click and manually change the size or manually change the hardness. All right, and then hit your return key to apply it or just start painting. Now, when making adjustments, you want your brush to be relatively small. You don't want to have a giant brush doing too much work than or more work than you anticipated doing, and ruining other areas, because all we really want to do is just clean up these areas. All right, so the way that this tool works is, once again, you hold down the Option key. So you get to choose where you're getting the information from, where the previous tool selects the information for you. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I want to sample an area from here. So hold down the Option key, and then I paint over this, and you see how it cleans that up, how it fixes it. I can sample over here, clean that up. You want to continuously click. You want to make this random. You don't want to get what are referred to as repeating patterns, because you can get a repeating pattern easily by using the same single click. So if you just Option clicked one time, you could see a repeat of your pattern, repeat of your texture, and it's going to look fake. People are going to know that the image was retouched, and that's what you're trying not to do. So if I toggle the eyeball on and off, we can see the areas that have been repaired. Okay, so that's the second tool. The third tool that we have here is the patch tool. Now what the patch tool is going to allow you to do is a larger area at once. So for example, if I want to get rid of, let's do something big here. There's a few patches here. Let's say that what I want to do is take care of all of this all at once. I can put I can drag my cursor around the area I want to fix, and then once you do so, all you've done is created a selection. You could use any of your selection tools to do this as well. Then you put your cursor inside of here and you move it, but you will get this warning letting you know that it can't do anything because the selected area is empty. Okay, why is it empty? Same reason that the other tools didn't work, because we're working on a layer that is not the image layer, the pixel layer. Okay, so let's take a look at the options up at the top here and what we have. Now in our class we didn't go over selections, but these are icons that you would notice, that you would see when you're working with the selection tools. So we have the new selection, add to selection, subtract from selection, and intersect with selection. So these are just ways to either to make the selection larger, make the selection smaller, or to use two different selections to create the area that you want to have selected. Where they overlap each other, that's where the selection is going to remain, and where they don't, those areas are going to disappear. You'd have to experiment to see what I'm talking about. I'm not going to do it as a demonstration here. I'm going to skip over the patch area for a reason, and then just go over to the next. We can set this area as our source, or we can set it as our destination. All right, the source where we're grabbing it from, destination where we're moving it to. Okay, so we can switch those. We can also have it transparent, and we can also use a pattern if we wanted to. I showed you patterns in a previous one. Now, how do we get this particular tool to work on a separate layer? Because right now, the only way it's going to work is if we go to the background layer and put my cursor back inside the selection and move it. Now you can see how it's moving, all right, and how it's going to grab information from here. When I let it go, it's going to combine the two of them together. All right, so I left that so you can see that. All right, I'm going to undo it. Now, how do we get this to work on a separate layer? Because I've already told you, you don't want to do your editing on your pixel layer. What we do is we go to the patch option, the one that I skipped over. We click on this and you'll notice that there's only two options here. We want to set this to content aware. Once we set this to content aware, we will now have the option to sample all layers. We can also choose our adaptation on how we're going to grab this information, the surrounding information. So now we have the option to sample all layers. So now I can work on layer 1, again, put my cursor in here, move it to a spot, you could fine tune it, and then once you release, it puts the two of them together. It didn't get the spot that I wanted, didn't get the look I wanted, I can edit undo and move it to another location and try it again. Okay, edit undo, click and drag to another location and try it again. All right, so it may or may not work depending on how you guys are doing it, but also keep in mind that it's for larger areas. Okay, that was its original intent. However, a lot of people prefer to use this as their main editing tool. So instead of using the healing brush or the spot healing brush as the previous tools that I demonstrated to you, they prefer to use this tool. So all you have to do really when working with smaller blemishes is just make a selection around it, drag to a location, make a selection, drag to a location where you want to sample from. So the selection doesn't have to be really big. It can be small and you can work quickly. Still, the thing is you want to pay attention to where you're moving your selection to. You know, sometimes working fast is not necessarily the best way to work. I mean, in reality, professional retouching takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of skill. So it takes a lot of practice. So this is a fine way, but it also depends on your image. You have to keep that in mind. I'm not saying that the people who use this in this manner of making smaller selections, that they're wrong. Um, all I'm saying is that it depends on the image. If you only have a few things that you need to fix, then this is going to be fine. Okay, so those are the three tools, the spot healing brush, the healing brush, and the patch tool that we'll find here. Now, one other tool that we can use is the clone stamp tool. Now, what you need to keep in mind about the clone stamp tool is that the clone stamp actually clones information from one area to another area. So you may find that you're having difficulty with texture and with tone. Um, the tones rapidly change, especially in skin. We're going from a light tone to a medium tone to a darker tone, back to a medium tone, back to a lighter tone. So they can rapidly change here. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind when working with the clone tool. Now, up at the top, we have all of our options for this. We'll notice that some of them are similar to the way that the paintbrush works. And the only thing that we're going to see different here really are the layers that we're working on. So keep this in mind once again. Current layer is the default. I want to set this to current and below so that I can work on the new layer and not directly on the background layer. Now this one works similar to the healing brush. What you have to do is you have to hold down the option key to select, or alt key on the PC, and select where you want to grab your pixels from. But the difference is what it does is it makes an exact duplicate. So for example, I'm going to click on this obvious blemish here. Click there and I'm going to move my cursor over. Now what it does is it paints another blemish. As I continue moving along, it continues to paint that blemish over and over and over. That's that repeating pattern that I had pointed out earlier. So make sure that you are very aware of that. if you're trying to get rid of long lines, like the skin lines, for example, sample in different areas. Don't sample in the same place. Sample up, sample down. This is not necessarily a thing that I want to do, but I'm just pointing out about not sampling from one location. You want to continuously move that selection around. All right, now another tip for you is if let's say that the clone tool is the only tool of the bunch that uh, works for you in getting the area that you want to clean up cleaned up, but it doesn't look right afterwards. You could then follow up with one of the healing tools. So for example, I can go back over that area with the healing brush, all right, to make it a little more random, to help it work together, to help it blend in together. Okay, and those are your tools for retouching. All right, hope that these help out, and I'll get into I'll make another video on how to the concepts of softening skin, going from an old school way of doing it to something that's a little more modern, but not getting too advanced with it. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope it works out for you, and I'll catch you in the next video.